Hello friends, this is Navdeep Singh from Hitbullseye.com. Today we'll be starting with our art and culture series, and in that firstly we'll be discussing about the Indian architecture. So in Indian architecture, our topics for discussion for today would be based upon the time period which we would be studying. So we'll be looking into the ancient architecture, then the medieval, and lastly the modern architecture. So starting with the ancient architecture, firstly we'll be discussing about the architecture of the Harappan age. The Harappan people or the Indus Valley people had indulged into various forms of architecture. They had seals, pottery, an elaborate system of town planning which we had already discussed, and bronze sculptures. The most important of these were town planning and pottery. And we've already discussed these town planning and pottery in our earlier series of ancient history. Apart from that, all the ancient architecture was divided into two parts, namely the court architecture and the popular one. Court architecture or court art was one which the various Raja, Maharajas or the emperors would indulge into, and the popular architecture or art was one which the common people and people or masses would indulge into. Court art was one which was on a larger scale. So in that we'll be studying about pillars and stupas. Whereas popular art was one about caves, sculptures and pottery or things or architecture at a smaller level. So talking a bit about pillars, pillars were most popular in the Mauryan and the post-Mauryan period. And one of the most popular pillars that we have in the country was that of Sarnath pillar and the pillar at Lauria, Nandangarh. Apart from that, we also have various stupas. Stupas are the masterpiece of Buddhist architecture, and in that the most famous we have is the Sanchi Stupa and the Barhut Stupa. After that we look into what the popular art was about. As we've already discussed, the most common popular art was that of cave architecture, sculptures and pottery. So in cave architecture, this was the period of ancient history, and there was polishing inside the caves. What the ancient people would do is they would plaster the walls of the caves and then indulge into various paintings or other things that they wanted to do. And one of the most popular caves was that of Barabar cave and Nagarjuni cave. Apart from that, we also have evidences of various sculptures of Yaksh and Yakshini. And in that, the most popular is that of a Yakshini sculpture at the Darganj in Bihar. This is a very famous tourist location because of the Yakshini sculpture. And lastly, the popular art was that of the pottery. And pottery of this time was called the Nadan black polished ware, where the most important color that was used on the pottery was that of black. We also discussed ancient architecture with regards to the schools. The most common schools of architecture in ancient history was that of Gandhara school and the Mathura school. Here we are talking about the periods of Mauryan and post-Mauryan architecture. So we'll look into features or important characteristics of both of the schools, and starting with Gandhara school, this was the school in which there was high Greek influence, and architecture of Gandhara school was made with the use of grey sandstone, and this was developed by the Kushana dynasty. Apart from this, the Gandhara school of architecture was mainly based upon the themes of Buddhism and was located around the northwest frontier parts of the country of that time. In this school, since we have already discussed that it was mainly regarding to the themes of Buddhism, Buddha was shown to be in the spiritual form in the Gandhara school. Next is the Mathura school of art or Mathura school of architecture of the post-Mauryan times. In this, there was no outside influence. This was basically a very indigenous type of school in which red sandstone was used. Now we have to make differences between the Mathura and the Gandhara school. In the Mathura school, we made use of red sandstone because it was available locally, whereas in the Gandhara school, we made use of grey sandstone because it was available locally in the northwestern parts of the country. Mathura school had developed in and around the regions of present-day Mathura. And again, there is one more difference between Mathura school of art or architecture and the Gandhara school of architecture, that Gandhara school of architecture was mainly based upon Buddhist themes. But on the other hand, Mathura school of architecture had themes of all the three religions at that time present in the country, namely Jainism, Buddhism, and obviously the Hinduism. And in this, Buddha was shown to be a delighted being as against a spiritual being in the Gandhara school. We also have another school of architecture called the Amaravati school, but that is very much similar to the Mathura school that we already discussed. The only difference being that in the place of red sandstone that was used in the Mathura school, the Amaravati school made use of white sandstone. Other features remaining the same. So this was mainly about the ancient architecture that we had to discuss. After that is the medieval architecture. In the medieval architecture, we discussed mainly about the architecture of the Mughal times and also the periods of Delhi Sultanate. And firstly, we'll be discussing the basic features, and after that, the contribution of each and every major emperor to the architecture in the country. So the main features are that with the introduction of medieval periods, there was an introduction of arc and dome method of construction of architecture in the country. Minars started to be built around the architecture at that time. The medieval architecture also avoided representation of human beings in their architecture. And there was proper use of geometry and symmetry in that architecture. Apart from that, we also have intricate jali work, a charbog style, and water use in the premises. These are the basic features of Mughal architecture or the medieval architecture. Now, looking into the architectural contribution of the Delhi Sultanate, firstly we have the Ilbari dynasty. After that, we had the Khalji dynasty, then the Tughlaqs, the Sayyids, and lastly the Lodhis. So we'll be discussing some important contribution of each and every dynasty here. The contribution of Ilbari dynasty was that it constructed the Quwat-ul-Islam. Another contribution was the construction of Arayuddin Ka Jhonpada, and the most important was Qutub Minar by Qutubuddin Aibak. After that, we had the Khalji dynasty. Khalji dynasty made use of the method of arc and dome, as we have previously discussed, to the widest possible extent. And with that method, they made the Alia Darwaza and the Siri Fort in present day Delhi. After that, we have the Tughlaqs. We all know the Tughlaq dynasty being established by Ghiyasuddin Tughlaq, the other major leaders being Muhammad bin Tughlaq and Firoz Tughlaq. They used grey sandstone. And in that period, even though this was a period in which architecture was not promoted to such an extent as the others had promoted it, they still established the cities of Tughlaqabad, the Jahanpana, and Firoz Shah Kotla. After the Tughlaqs, the Sayyids could not do much into the architectural contribution into the country because of their short span. We look into the contribution of the Lodhis. The important leaders of the Lodhis being Bahlol Lodhi, Sikandar Lodhi, and Ibrahim Lodhi. So they introduced the concept of double dome into the country. In the double dome concept, what they would do is they would build domes of two different materials or two different bricks into a single dome. And they also established the city of Agra, which was one of the most important architectural contribution for the Indian history. After that, various localized provinces or localized styles came into being, such as Bengal area had developed its own style of architecture called the Bengal school. Malwa had its own style of architecture. Jaunpur area had its own style of architecture. So we start seeing that various localized types of art and architecture start coming into being. Now, after the Lodhis, we all know with the study of history that the Mughals came into being, and the first Mughal leader was Babur. Now, since Babur was involved in too many wars and establishing the roots of the Mughal Empire, he could not concentrate much upon the architectural development in the country. So what he contributed was only two mosques, one at Panipat and another at Rohilkhand. After that, Humayun again was indulged in too many wars against Sher Shah Suri and also some internal battles. He could not contribute much to the architectural development in the country. The major contribution was done by Akbar the Great. He constructed the Agra Fort, Fatehpur Sikri and the Govind Dev temple at Vrindavan. Akbar was also very fond of architecture, that he developed a department of architecture as a different department. After that, the major contribution was done by Jahangir, who constructed Akbar's tomb at Sikandara and Moti Masjid at Lahore. Now we come to a point where Mughal architecture was at the higher watermark of the times. With the coming of Shah Jahan and with his contribution in Mughal architecture or architectural development in the country, this was the period of high watermark. He constructed the Taj Mahal under the guidance of the chief architect Ustad Isa. He constructed the Red Fort, the Shalimar Bagh and the city of Shah Jahanabad. And the last Mughal leader or Mughal emperor was Aurangzeb. In Aurangzeb's time, all kinds of art and architecture, be it construction of buildings, be it painting, be it music, everything was discouraged. But the only construction that he or his empire did was that of Bibi Ka Maqbara, which is popularly called as a poor imitation of the Taj. That was all about the medieval architecture that we wanted to discuss. After the medieval architecture, we look into the modern types of architecture, or the architecture which the invaders or colonists in the country had brought into the country. So while discussing that, firstly we look into the Portuguese architecture. The Portuguese used the Iberian style of construction, which had brick as the main material. Apart from that, we also had the wooden roofs and the plaster carvings as its main features in the Iberian style of construction. Apart from the Portuguese architecture, we also have the British style of architecture in the country. To discuss the British style of architecture, it is divided mainly into two styles, the Indo-Gothic style and the Indo-Roman style. Firstly, the Indo-Gothic style had features such as crucified ground plan, large windows, elaborate and large or very large constructions of very big scales. The examples of these are the St. Paul's Cathedral in Kolkata and the Chepauk Palace in Chennai. Second is the Indo-Roman style of construction which the British had brought into the country. Its important features were the upturned dome, focus on circular buildings and simplicity of construction. And its important examples are the Parliamentary House and the Rashtrapati Bhavan. Even in the present day architecture and buildings that we are constructing, we are having certain kind of inherent evidences of the Indo-Roman style as well. And while discussing the Indo-Roman style or the style of architecture that the British had brought into the country, we should also be aware that the famous architects of the time were two, namely the Le Corbusier and secondly Laurie Baker. So this is the type of modern architecture followed by us on the lines of Iberian style and the British style that we are following in the country. So that is all about the modern architecture, and in today's lecture we have discussed about ancient architecture, medieval and the modern architecture. So that is all about architecture that I wanted to discuss. Thank you.